Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's call this meeting to order. Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the Area 2 Planning Committee. For the benefit of those watching on our YouTube channel, members of the committee are present in the chamber and these members will be voting on proposals this evening. Other members of the council are also in attendance and/or participating via MS Teams and can take part in any discussions, ask questions, but not vote. Your attention is drawn to agenda item 1, which sets out the guidance on how meetings will be conducted, including the ground rules. Before we start with formal business, we'll confirm attendance of voting members by doing a roll call. Victoria, over to you.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Present.
Apologies being received from Councillor Brown. Councillor Banks.
Present.
Apologies being received from Councillor Betts. Bolton.
Present.
Councillor Boxall.
Present.
Councillor Coffin.
Present.
Councillor Crisp is participating via MS Teams.
Online, yes.
Councillor Dean.
Present.
Councillor Harman.
I'm here online.
Councillor Hudson.
Present.
Councillor Lark.
Present.
Councillor Roud.
Present.
Hannah.
Present.
Councillor Tatton.
Present.
Councillor Taylor.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could I now ask officers to introduce themselves? Do you want to start with Mr. Bailey?
Evening members, James Bailey, Head of Planning. James Moisey, Principal Planning Officer.
Susan Field, Senior Planning Officer.
Sarah Edwards, Planning Officer.
And we have our legal team is online.
Joy Ukadike, Head of Legal and Democratic Services.
Thank you. Members of the public, applicant and/or agent wishing to address the planning committee are present in the chamber and will be invited to speak at the appropriate time. The speaking time limit of 3 minutes for each application and continues to be applied, and public speakers are unable to participate in any discussion of the application. So we've done apologies. We've just Councillor Betts and Councillor Brown. Declarations of interest from anybody? No, thank you. Minutes, can I sign the minutes for the last meeting? All agreed? Thank you. There is a glossary and information on your planning agendas if you need to refer to it. So let's start with our first application for the evening. London Golf Club, South Ash Manor. We have a presentation by Ms. Morrissey, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to the London Golf Club. Before I start the presentation, there are 2 updates to report. The approved plans condition 2 on page 123 of the agenda is to be updated by removing the existing plans referenced and lists. And secondly, the monitoring fee referred to on page 122, paragraph 7.1 is now £460 per obligation as per the annual fee increases rather than the £400 reference. The application is a cross-boundary application with Sevenoaks District Council, and the proposals within Tunbridge and Malling include the erection of a hotel with spa, restaurant and conference facilities, the erection of visitor lodge accommodation, the creation of an underpass under Ash Lane, the erection of a sports pavilion, creation of racket courts and a swimming lake, the relocation of a driving range. The proposals within both Tunbridge and Malling and Sevenoaks districts are the change of use of a Grade 2 star listed building known as South Ash Manor to visitor accommodation to form part of a wider wedding venue to be created at the site. And the proposals solely within Sevenoaks district include the erection of 5 woodland lodges, the demolition of a former care home building and creation of a sports turf academy and 3G pitch, and new equestrian facilities including an arena and replacement stables. The application site is located to the west and northwest of Stansted Village and to the east of West Kingsdown in Sevenoaks. The site is situated to the east of the M20 and to the north of London Road or the A20. Ash Lane runs between two parcels of the application site. See my cursor, but it's that red line running through the site is Ash Lane. On screen now, you can see a borough boundaries plan. So everything that is shaded is within Sevenoaks district, and everything that's to the east of the site and not shaded is within Tunbridge and Malling Borough Council. For the purposes of the application and as set out within the committee report, the site has been subdivided into the above areas and locations, which you can see on your screen now. So the central cluster most notably comprises the existing clubhouse and the Grade 2 star building of South Ash Manor. The eastern parcel comprises agricultural land located to the east of Ash Lane. The western parcel comprises the existing driving range at the golf club. And the southern parcel comprises grazing land and a former care home building. And the equestrian parcel hosts a paddock and a stable block. So on screen now, you can see an aerial view of the application site. In planning terms, the site is located in the countryside outside of a defined settlement boundary and within the green belt. In addition, a number of public rights of way run across and adjacent to the site. And here you can see the site's access point from Stansted Lane, where visitors by car would then drive along a long sort of internal access road to parking areas which are located primarily around the clubhouse area. And here you can see the site's northern part of the eastern parcel of the application site, looking towards the north. And here you can see again the northern part of the eastern parcel looking south. Here you can see a public right-of-way which cuts across the eastern parcel of the application site, looking from the eastern boundary. And again, here you can see the eastern parcel looking towards Ash Lane from the public right-of-way, and to the right hand side is the northern part. And here you can see the southern part of the eastern parcel, and you'll just notice how the land level sort of gradually slopes upwards towards the east side. And again, here you can see the southern part of the eastern parcel looking in a southwest direction. And here you can see again the southern part of the eastern parcel from public right of way back towards Ash Lane. And here you can see Ash Lane looking towards the south. So beyond those tree belts is the eastern parcel. And Ash Lane looking in a northern direction. Beyond that hedgerow was the northern part of the eastern parcel. Moving to the western parcel, looking across the existing driving range. And again, the western parcel, but looking towards the north, back towards the driving range bays or booths. And here you can see the south end of the western parcel, and you notice how the land levels slope away gradually towards the south side. Here you can see an aerial of the western parcel, again looking towards the south. So the left hand side of here, where you can see my cursor now, the existing driving range at the rear end of the southern parcel. Again, an aerial looking back towards the western parcels. The right hand side of this is a woodland clearing, which also forms part of the western parcel, straight at the main body, the western parcel of the application. And here you can see a woodland clearing, which forms part of the western parcel, but is solely within Sevenoaks District Council. And turning to the central cluster part of the application site, here you can see the front elevation of the Grade 2 star listed South Ash Manor. And this front elevation falls within Sevenoaks District. And here you can see the rear facing elevation, which is mainly within Tunbridge and Malling, but you'll see the borough boundary sort of cuts across this building. And turning to the southern parcel, which is solely within Sevenoaks, you can see some grazing land taken from Stansted Lane. And here you can see a former care home building which sits in the southern parcel. Right. And here you can see the equestrian parcel of the application site, again taken from Stansted Lane. It's not too clear on the photos, but just to the right-hand side of the photo sort of area where an existing stable block located. So on the screen now is the existing and proposed block plans for the site. So in summary, the application seeks full planning permission for the erection of a 240-bed hotel in the western parcel. So that is just here where my cursor is. I hope you can see that moving around. A total of 78 lodges in the western and eastern parcels, 73 of which are located within Tunbridge and Malling. Here in the eastern parcel. The erection of a sports pavilion and pursuits area in the eastern parcel. There. The relocation of the driving range and creation of a Callaway Elite Performance Centre in the northern part of the eastern parcel. The creation of an underpass from the western parcel to the eastern parcel under Ash Lane. That point there. The creation of a wedding venue, accommodation and facilities, and change of use of South Ash Manor to wedding accommodation and a registry office. That's in the central cluster, predominantly in Sevenoaks district. The creation of a sports turf academy and 3G pitch in the southern parcel, right to the north of the A20, the east of Stansted Lane. And improvements to the existing equestrian facility, including the erection of a replacement stable block. And here you can see the eastern and western and central clusters of the application site in slightly more detail. The eastern and western parcels are almost entirely within TNBC, barring the woodland clearing, which is just to the south of this plan on the screen now. And the central cluster is predominantly within Sevenoaks, albeit the borough boundary cuts across South Ash Manor. So it's just here, the borough boundary. Pointer. And here you can see the proposed block plan for the hotel. So permission was previously granted for a hotel in this part of the application site. However, the now proposed hotel is a much more modern and landscape-led design, which has sought to utilise the topography of the site. It's about make out the topography lines and the land, how it slopes down south. And here you can see a visual of the proposed hotel looking from the southeast. And again, you can see another visual of the proposed hotel looking towards the north. And here you can see the proposed ground floor. So the entrance to the hotel, which is now, main entrance is there, leads into a spacious circulation space and reception area with a central void above. The ground floor level also proposes to host a restaurant, lounge areas, bar, all leading onto a spacious west-facing terrace. And the ground floor is also proposed to provide a salon, a gym, and the proposed spa facilities, which is the blue section, this right-hand side screen. And here you can see the proposed first floor plan, hosting hotel rooms. And again, the second floor plan. And the third floor plan is mainly hosting suites, so larger than the hotel rooms proposed. And here you can see the lower ground floor. So the topography of the site allows for the creation of a lower ground floor, which is proposed to accommodate a central conference room, which is the big orange section, along with function rooms and entertainment facilities. The southern part of the basement level is proposed to host the loading bays, storerooms, back of house rooms, and plant rooms. And that's that yellow section. Here you can see the proposed hotel rooms, the floor plans for them, and the proposed suites of floor plans. So two types of suites. The one on the left, slightly larger than the mini suite, as it's called, the one on the right. And here you can see some visuals of the interiors of how they may look. Permission has previously been granted at the site for a 130-bed hotel, and visuals of this previous consent are on the screen now. This permission is extant and could therefore still be implemented. And the plan on screen now provides a footprint comparison of what was previously approved, the blue dashed outline, and the now proposed hotel. And here you can see a mass comparison looking towards the north with the extant hotel shown in white, out the proposed hotel sort of centrally within that. Whilst the now proposed hotel offers an increase in the level of accommodation against that previously approved in terms of its mass and scale, it is considered to be of a much more efficient building previously. And again, you can see a mass comparison looking towards the south. Moving to the proposed lodge accommodation, here you can see the proposed lodge accommodation and underpass block plan. Permission has previously been granted for an underpass at the site, and the underpass now proposed as part of this application is the same as that previously approved. A mix of 2, 3 and 4 bedroom lodges are proposed across the eastern and western parcels, and cars and visitors to the site would utilise the site's existing access point, where users would drop their car off at a valet drop-off point around the hotel entrance and would then access the eastern parcel either on foot, bike or golf buggy. And that's the same for the sports pavilion and the pursuits in that eastern parcel. So no cars would enter that site. It would all be golf buggies or foot or bicycle. Here you can see a couple of visuals of the proposed lodges in the eastern and western parcels of the site. And the proposed lodge form of accommodation is similar to that of the hotel suites, but with a greater amount of accommodation more suitable for groups to stay at the site. And you'll see each lodge is proposed to have its own covered buggy parking area and not be accessible by car. And here you can see the proposed floor plan for the 2-bedroom lodge type and the 3-bedroom lodge type and the 4-bedroom lodge type. So all the lodge types are based over 2 floors. And a visual of how the living or entertainment space may look in those lodges. In addition to the 73 lodges proposed within TMBC, 5 woodland lodges are proposed within the woodland clearing in Sevenoaks district, and on screen now some visuals how they may look. And here you can see the proposed pursuits and pavilion block plan located in the eastern parcel of the site. And the pursuits proposed to the south of the proposed sports pavilion include a swimming lake, which you can see to the bottom left-hand corner of the plan on the screen, 3 tennis courts and 4 paddle courts. And here you can see a visual of the proposed pavilion sports building. And again, looking across the proposed swimming lake, the proposed pavilion building. And here you can see the proposed floor plan of the pavilion. So the western part of the proposed pavilion is to comprise a restaurant and bar, which spills out onto a terrace space overlooking those racket courts. And the eastern part of the building is proposed to host a gym, studio spaces, a sporting shop, along with changing facilities. And to the immediate east of the pavilion is a kids club proposed, an external play space. So that's just right area over here. And here you can see the proposed block plan of the relocated driving range in the northern part of the eastern parcel. And again, the relocation of a driving range has previously been granted in part of the. And here you can see a visual of the proposed driving range in the Callaway Elite Performance Centre. And here you can see the proposed floor plan for that. So at this end now is the proposed Callaway Elite Performance Centre, and to the right, the remainder being the more standard driving range bays. Permission has previously been granted on the eastern parcel for the creation of a 9-hole golf course, the relocation of the driving range along with the underpass. These permissions are extant and could therefore still be implemented. The image on the left of the screen now shows what has previously been approved at the site. So that's the 9-hole course, the driving range and the underpass. And the block plan on the right shows a comparison of the previous permission with what is now being proposed. So the proposed lodges are proposed to sit on the lower land level of this eastern parcel, whereas the previously approved 9-hole golf course approached much further to the east and the south, and adjacent to a public right-of-way which runs north-south direction, adjacent to this eastern part. So turning to the central cluster, now you can see the green line which shows the borough boundary. So everything to the north of that is Sevenoaks, and everything to the south, so the very south of South Ash Manor, is within Tunbridge and Malling. And these buildings collectively are proposed to form a wedding venue. So South Ash Manor, the Grade 2 star listed building, which partly sits within TNBC, is proposed to host wedding accommodation and a registry office. A reception venue is proposed within an existing barn, which is this one here. And further wedding accommodation is proposed within the other existing building. So a stable block here, supposed to have 4 lodges. Then these are 2 existing residential units, which again propose to provide wedding accommodation on site. To the left here, for reference, is the existing clubhouse. Here you can see the proposed front and rear elevations of South Ash Manor. That we focus on the bottom image, which is the rear-facing elevation, which sits partly within TNBC, and the photo to the right. The most notable change is the removal of a more modern conservatory, which you can see in the picture. Here you can see the side-facing elevations. The proposed ground floor plan, so you can just see to the bottom of the screen the removal of the conservatory, and this is proposed to host the registry room, along with general sort of amenity spaces, a kitchen, games room, drawing room. Is the proposed first floor of South Ash Manor, which is to host 4 bedrooms, and the second floor, a roof space, which hosts a further 2 bedrooms. And here you can see the proposed block plan for the Sports Turf Academy within the southern parcel of the site, and this is solely within Sevenoaks district. The proposal here is to demolish an existing building on site and erect a new single-storey building, along with the installation of a 3G pitch. A range of sporting services are proposed to also be located in this part of the application site to provide external spaces for learning and develop agronomy skills in conjunction with the proposed academy. And access to this parcel is directly from the A20 south. And here you can see the proposed elevations for the Sports Turf Academy building. Here you can see the proposed floor plan. So one half of the building is proposed to host changing rooms, associated facilities, and the other half is to comprise more of educational facilities, classrooms, workspaces. And here you can see the equestrian parcel, again solely within Sevenoaks. And the main change proposed in this part of the application site is the replacement of the existing stable block in the same location. So here you can see proposed elevations. That. And on screen now is a summary of the reasons for the recommendation. Otherwise, the recommendation is as set out in the agenda, and there are no further updates to report.
Thank you, James. We have one public speaker who is online. I'm not even going to try and pronounce your surname. Jan, are you there?
Hello there.
Hello. Yes, we can hear you. You have 3 minutes, and I will start the timer when you begin.
Great. Thank you. So my name is Jan Skanetsky. I live in 2 Bouts Corner Cottage, and I speak on behalf of my family and my neighbours at 1 Bouts Corner Cottage. As you've seen in the maps, we are in the property surrounded on all 4 sides by the golf club land and the proposed hotel and lodges that are planned to be developed. They are in very close proximity. So the hotel is 77 metres, the lodges are 73 metres, and in fact, these are the woodland lodges, and then additional lodges are within around about 100 metres of our property. So we are the residents that are most directly and immediately impacted by those developments, both in the construction and the operation in terms of noise, light, and of course the construction of the development. We have objections that we've previously submitted to Sevenoaks and Tunbridge and Morning councils, and we would like to re-raise those. The development has increased significantly in scope from the previous planning granted, with the hotel almost doubling in size. And much of this new development, both in hotel and additional buildings, is directly in the vicinity of our immediate properties. Our objections are in threefold. So given the increased scope and size, we're really concerned about the noise and light pollution 24/7 during the construction and the ongoing operation. Given its closeness of the building, the path, the hotel, the lodges to our and our neighbours' property, the home, the garden, and therefore the disruption to our lifestyle. There's been no commitment or comment made as to how the construction or development and the ongoing operation will be mitigated to our lives and to our property. Second, the lack of consideration to improving the traffic and public transport links with the local community. So the impact assessment on the traffic disruption, we believe, is unrealistic with regards to volume, noise and pollution and safety. So the assessment has stated that disruption to South Ash Road and Stansted Lane will be minimally impacted, which we believe is nonsensical. South Ash Road is 60 miles per hour a road limit that already we perceive as dangerous due to very narrow passageways and quite a lot of traffic already. And this would benefit from a clear strategy to implement speed restriction and improve the safety, both for local residents and the community nearby. And thirdly, the lack of clear commitment on how the local community will directly benefit from the development. This is one of the main stated aims of the project, and it has not been made clear at all how this development will deliver for the locals and how we can access and benefit from the development. So none of this has been specified, and our questions have not been addressed with this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. That was 1 second to go. We now have a speaker for the applicant, Stephen Follett. You sit on the first chair and then turn on the mic.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Committee. My name is Stephen Follett and I'm the Chief Executive for the London Golf Club. We're here tonight seeking planning permission for a new master plan which will support our continued successful operation as well as our long-term ambitions. The London Golf Club is home to 2 championships golf courses and has become a central part of the European golfing landscape over the past 30 years, having hosted a range of professional and amateur tournaments. We're an established hospitality venue regularly hosting corporate golf days and team events for businesses across Kent, London and the South East. Despite our current offering and enviable location, our hospitality provision is not commensurate with world-class golf destinations. And this is hindering us continuing to attract national and international events. We've worked collaboratively with officers and members of Tunbridge and Malling Borough Council over the last 2 years, and we thank them for their time and feedback. We also have proactively engaged with the local community, including our neighbours at Stansted Parish Council, and sought to adjust our proposals in response to feedback received, including increasing the size of the woodland buffer to ensure views are obscured from Stansted, reducing the number of tennis and paddle courts, associated hard standing and lights to address concerns in relation to noise and light, and upgrading the community equestrian facilities, making the ride more accessible to all. The 2 extant planning permissions from 2011 for the new hotel, relocated driving range and underpass prove the need for enhanced facilities at the club. By using these planning permissions, we as a starting point, we have developed a new vision positioning the club as Kent's first health and well-being focused leisure destination, supported by a range of accommodation, new sporting facilities, turf academy, and viable use for a Grade 2 star listed building. Crucially, the plans can also aid us in growing our outreach and engagement with the community. And these include delivery of sporting facilities, high quality and sustainable design development respects the site's contents within the Greenbelt, promotion of exemplary sustainability and energy measures, one of the country's only dedicated sports turf academies, local employment opportunities, including 820 new jobs in the final development, visitor spend of approximately 8.4 million per year. 20% biodiversity net gain on site and the preservation and management of ancient woodland, and also the provision of a community benefits plan. It is on this basis we believe planning permission should be granted tonight. We are committed to delivering a long-term investment for the borough, and we intend to continue to work closely with the council and our neighbours. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, now this has come before us. Nobody's actually called it in, but because it is Sevenoaks and Tunbridge and Malling, we need to have it in committee. Would anybody like to speak to this application? Councillor Coffin.
Thank you. As one of the two local members, I think I should go. I have discussed this, by the way, quite at length with Robin Betts, who's the other local member, and he, having read through the report, is very much predisposed to voting this through if he had the opportunity to do so, subject, of course, to how the debate goes. I think this is an absolutely excellent application. It's an exemplar application, I'd say, because at every stage, the community has been involved, we've been involved, and things have happened. This application has evolved from the first iteration right way through. I think James and the team have done extraordinarily well, not only to write 118 pages of report, but actually to go through it in the detail that they have. And I suspect shaped and modified this as we've gone through to the point we now see it. I think the speaker was talking about the use of Ash Lane, and it is an awful road. But as far as I can see, everything has been done to keep all of the traffic off that road, and it's been done in such a way that it will probably improve the area, because all of the traffic will now go through the underpass, and I believe the construction traffic is also to go under the underpass. But I do notice that condition number 3, the construction and environmental management plan, has to be given to us, and it's to be designed in such a way to minimize noise, light pollution, odor, dust, etc., etc. It was one of the first questions I did ask of the application, particularly with regard to the hotel, because the original application, the original extant application, was very close to the neighbours' houses and was quite likely to create quite a bit of noise. I've been told that all of the hardware involved in running a hotel, the deliveries and so forth, is now in a sunken area behind the hotel, such that the noise pollution from the operation of the hotel will be less than the original extant permission. If I'm wrong, please do let me know. Because obviously I see that this application is a huge improvement on what could be built out tomorrow morning. The whole benefit to the wildlife, the biodiversity net gain at 20%, obviously to be agreed and accepted. It's very good to see that on site as well. So looking through the papers, time after time I read no objection, agree. The way this application has been worked has been extraordinarily good. There's been engagement with everybody, including Stansted Parish Council. Now, I know Stansted Parish Council have a requirement for Section 106 agreements to come from this, but unfortunately they don't meet the tests. But I do know that there's still dialogue going on between the London Golf Club and the Parish Council, because I believe that the London Golf Club is setting out to be a good neighbour, and certainly looking at the community benefits that we see from it, the employment benefits, and the community engagement in the academy area is to be laudable. So I actually only have one question resulting from this. So you've clearly done a good job and you've written an amazing report. The extant permission covers quite a lot of the area and lots of different areas within that. If we were to grant tonight this application, does it, by way of the Section 106 agreement, which I read somewhere, does it extinguish anything from the previous applications? And I'm thinking particularly of the eastern section of the ground, where I believe there was a question mark about could they still put in elements of a 9-hole golf course. Perhaps you could answer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, so the hotel, as you say, there's an extant permission for 130-bed hotel, and by virtue of the location of the proposed hotel on the same footprint, it's almost impossible to deliver any element of the previously approved hotel, the now proposed hotel. The eastern parcel, which is on screen now, the comparison, there is potential to still deliver parts of that 9-hole golf course. So to offset that, part of the legal agreement, and if I refer you to paragraph 7.1 of the report, there is a heads of term or point that will be in the 106 that effectively, layman's term, sort of quashes those previous decisions and those previous permissions, so that they cannot be well as this one in front of you.
And if I may, the question about the noise from the hotel or the neighbour.
Yes, you're correct. So the plant rooms and all of the back rooms of the hotel are proposed on the lower ground floor. So if you just look at these massings, the previously approved hotel didn't really take account for the topography and sloping land levels of the site, whereas the now proposed hotel, albeit it's a greater level of accommodation, isn't actually significantly greater in terms of its mass and scale. But yes, the lower ground floor, which you can see here, these yellow parts are the sort of service rooms. So it's tucked right away. And then to the south of the hotel, there is a woodland. It sort of leads onto that woodland clearing and those woodlands areas. So there's a bit of a buffer between the service areas of the hotel and the resident who spoke.
James, just before we go on, is that little square where the residents are? That is.
Yeah, so the blue square that you can see there to the east of the woodland clearing and woodland lodges in Sevenoaks, and to the south of the hotel is the 1 and 2 Bouts Corner cottages. So those properties are approximately sort of over 70 metres away from the proposed hotel. They're about approximately over 130 metres away from the closest lodges in the eastern parcel, and over 70 metres again from the 5 woodland lodges proposed in Sevenoaks. In addition, as Councillor Coffins mentioned, condition 3, there's a construction management plan condition. Obviously, the application is being considered by the council's own environmental protection team in regards to noise impact, and it would be them who ultimately would deal with future noise complaints, and they have deemed the application or not objected to the application. In addition, condition 17 requires lighting strategies to be submitted. Condition 18 requires noise mitigation strategies to be submitted to us for further consideration. Condition 28 requires details of hours of operation and use. And condition 31, which relates specifically to Ash Lane, restricts traffic movements on that, so that all visitors and users of this site will enter the site from the existing Stansted Lane entrance along the internal driveway and use the existing car parking and proposed parking facilities, and then access the eastern parcel via golf buggy or on foot via the proposed underpass. In addition to, so coming back to the construction point, unlike a lot of sites, this is there's 2 18-hole golf courses on this site. There's a lot of land here where construction vehicles, materials, etc., can be stored. Rather than, so directly, doesn't need to be all directly next to, in close proximity to the neighbours. We've already sort of discussed the hotel size comparison and those slides. In terms of the sort of community benefits, I'll probably refer you to paragraph 6.60 in the report, which summarises the community benefits of the application, along with the community benefits plan, which would be secured via the Section 106 agreement. And the final point I'd have to say is on the traffic modelling that was submitted in support of the application strongly indicated that the majority of car users to this site would use the major road network, so the M20, which is to the east of the site, and the London Road A20, rather than the rural lanes. Everything I'd have to say at the moment.
Okay, I have a couple of speakers. Mike Taylor.
Thank you very much.
I have to admire the amount of work that's gone into this application, putting this application together, both the officers and the developer and local members. And it seems like a wonderful thing. However, I personally cannot bring myself to vote for the loss of so much greenbelt. But then again, it would be churlish to vote against it, so I'll probably abstain when it comes to the push. One thing does concern me, and that is the size of the red line boundary. Now, I have been told recently that once a red line boundary is approved, whether or not the development comes forward, that land is now previously developed land. And under the current MPPF definition, previously developed land is grey belt. So it could be developed for anything. Now, I don't for a minute think London Golf Club are going to turn down a money-making venture like this to build houses. But let us be very careful about the worst possible scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you very much, Chair. What we've got here is we've got a facility in that happens to be in the borough, or at least part in the borough, that is looking to provide world-class golf in which we will be able to attract championship tournaments, hopefully, and they're looking to do the necessary infrastructure around that. And from a purely economic perspective, this will be a huge advantage to the borough and particularly the local area, and it'll be part of a sporting corridor with the training ground at Millwall and Brands Hatch, and maybe in the future London Wasps Stadium at Pedham Place, albeit there in Sevenoaks District. But nonetheless, we've got a golden opportunity here to really solidify this part of the world as somewhere where we can deliver high quality facilities that can support sport and use. So it's absolutely right that we demand a high quality application and we scrutinise it in a high quality way. And as Martin Coffin said, I think we've got that. The applicant has done a tremendous job in terms of being very thorough. In what is complex, I mean, having a borough boundary run through your site and run through listed buildings is hard from an application perspective and hard from a local planning authority perspective. But we've been able to overcome some of those challenges, I feel. We've also been able to look in some detail at the many different issues that arise from that. And I think this is a brilliant report. So thank you, James, for the time and effort that you've put into to writing this, because it's really clear that from the length of it, that we've really looked at every single possibility. And this should be a model for all reports to planning committees. There's a couple of issues that I just want to pick up on. The first, and builds on what the neighbour was saying about the construction, I think the construction management plan will be really important on this, just to look at the precise details in terms of how South Ash Road is impacted as little as possible, albeit that the traffic modelling suggests the M20 and A20 are going to be used most, and that's completely understandable. There will be the odd bit of traffic that will look to come from the north, from the sort of New Ash Green direction too. However, at the end of the day, the M20 and A20 are there as major trunk roads and are used accordingly. And the visitors to this site are likely to be using the strategic road network. Yes, I know the club wants to get sort of use by local residents, and rightly so, but we will be seeing, if we get championship golf as we want, then they'll be using the strategic road network. There are two elements at 7.1 that I think are important, which is why I wanted to speak. The first is in relation to the second point on the eastern parcel, building on the question earlier. Now, it says restriction of development on the eastern parcel with the exception of any temporary planning permissions required in support of major events, i.e. car parking, which seems perfectly sensible to me. In essence, it's also, I don't know if this is the case or not, we're removing permitted development rights from it. But I just think some clarity about that eastern parcel that would build on the point about whether that would become previously developed land or not, I just think is interesting to know. I don't think it's a deal breaker at all. The second point that I was just going to mention is the community benefit, the management board that will decide the details of the community benefit plan. It says in the recommendations option for TMBC to be part of the management board. I would suggest that we take that up. I'm sure Martin or Robin might want to be involved, and that might be a good thing in order to ensure that the community in Stansted benefits as much as possible from the huge investment that this will be in the local area, because we know that there are facilities in Stansted that are crying out for investment at the moment. We know it's very difficult to secure those through Section 106, but being the good neighbour that London Golf Club have demonstrated so far they wish to be, that to me seems like a really good vehicle in order to in order to achieve those community benefits. So on the whole, I'm very supportive of this application. I'd like to thank the officers and thank the applicants for the productive way in which they've approached this so far. And I think the decision tonight for us could be quite monumental in terms of delivering a world-class golfing facility that will result in tens of thousands and millions potentially in terms of investment into the local area. And this really could be a milestone if we pass this tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Chairman. I found this application very impressive. I really only have one question. And the first condition that we have in front of us is a condition to have a legal agreement to ensure that the woodland lodges don't become permanent accommodation. We have this problem in many places throughout the borough, and it seems to me that the system that we currently have for enforcing that kind of limitation haven't so far been very successful. And I'd like to know what is going to be put in place here that is going to ensure that what is intended stays the way that it's presented to us here. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, James, you wanted to come back on Councillor Taylor's point as well.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, I'd just like to remind members that we need to assess each application on its own merits, but I just wanted to clarify the point around grey belt, green belt and previously developed lands. So the report at 6.29 onwards discusses the green belt at length. And on screen now, you can see that the eastern parcel, which is presently agricultural land devoid of built form, has an extant permission. So there would be a red line around that site where the 9-hole golf course and driving range could have been built. However, if you refer to, and I'll read it out, paragraph 6.40 of the report, previously developed land is again defined within the glossary of the NPPF. However, the location of the majority of the proposed elements that make up this application comprises undeveloped land and agricultural land, which would not constitute PDL. So merely because there's a red line around it, until a permission has been implemented, like fully implemented, it's you can still consider it undeveloped land or not constituting PDL. In terms of the options on the community board that Councillor Borton raised, we take that points on board as we develop the Section 106, should there be a resolution to grant tonight, and the event management and the eastern parcel. So the red line of the eastern parcel doesn't include or extend as far as it did before. But yeah, those are those points in that heads of terms of the 106 that restrict development on that part of the site. In terms of the restriction of the lodges to residential units or privately owned residential units, I take your point that it's often very difficult to prevent, say, a single unit that's an Airbnb or an annex becoming a separate unit. However, this is obviously 73 lodges in the borough. There are public rights of way all around it, so it's very much in the public eye. And I think we would know be very quick to know that if it wasn't being complied with the legal agreement, and that's the purpose of having a term in the legal agreement, which you often wouldn't have for a smaller scale development, for that restriction. So I think we can, with confidence, say that the legal agreement and there's a term that restrict the occupation of the lodges to sort of tourist accommodation, holiday use is strong in this case.
Thank you. Councillor Tutton.
Thank you, Chairman. Just coming back to the green belt, grey belt issue, because you dealt with the previously developed land, but at 6.44, it's concluded that the site constitutes grey belt land, and you're saying the whole of the site is grey belt. And we were I was having a conversation with officers just before the meeting. I just need a bit of clarity and some advice. I'm inclined to support the application this evening, but it's just so that I can really understand this issue with grey belt and the 5 principles or the 5 purposes of the green belt and paragraph C and where that comes in or where it doesn't. I'm just surprised that the whole of the site is determined to be grey belt. I could understand that some parts of it might be, but when we had the site meeting, what really struck me, and I hadn't been to the club before, but it's so expansive and the views across it are so wide. I find it difficult to, and maybe I'm not understanding it properly, but if it were possible for, because this is grey belt, for a building of some description to suddenly appear in the middle of that expanse, that's why I'm thinking I'm not understanding it fully. So I'd just like some clarity around that. But also just to say, and one of the things that hasn't really been mentioned by others yet, lots has, but the refurbishment and renewal of the listed building, I think that's really important. That's a really sort of valuable contribution from it. Again, I was sorry to see the state that was in, however that's come about. And I think if that can be brought back to a viable use, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions you want to answer, James?
Come back.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. So before I move on to the grey belt issue, the listed building point is a fair point, and I'd like to reassure members that as part of the heads of terms, there is a point in there that to deliver South Ash Manor listed building consent work prior to the occupation of the hotel or lodges, to ensure that those works are taken at an earlier stage and phase of the development. In terms of the sort of grey belt issue, so the whole of the site is in the green belt. There are parts of the site which would constitute PDL where there's been previously built form, and there are other parts where we've had to do the grey belt assessment. So paragraph, as you correctly said, sort of paragraph 6.41 sets out what paragraph 143 of the MPPF says, and for a site or a land to be considered grey belt, it needs to be demonstrated that the site does not strongly contribute to any purposes of A, B and D in paragraph 143. So A is to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, which this isn't a large built-up area, or we certainly don't consider it to be. B, to prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another, which this isn't a case here. And D, to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. There isn't a town in the immediate vicinity here. What for a site to be considered grey belt, what it doesn't need to meet is part C of 143, which is to assist in safeguarding in the countryside from encroachment. So appreciate it's a very new thing that everyone's still getting their head around, but that's the key test is A, B and D. And if it doesn't strongly contribute to any of those purposes set out in 143, of A, B and D specifically, then it could be considered grey belt land. And then we're into for housing developments, the sort of golden rules and the other paragraphs that follow.
Back. Yep. Thank you. That's helpful. I think my concern is, as I was reading through, just how much of our grey belt is at risk as a result. And that wasn't clear to me before actually reading this report.
Members just need to consider you're only considering what's before you now. You're not suddenly going to get additional buildings on extension to the tourism accommodation at some point. That would have to go through the usual process. You're only considering what's in front of you now, and if at some time in the future there are other proposals, they would be assessed under government policy and the policies applicable at that particular time. So you're only assessing the applications before you now.
Okay, anybody else would like to speak on this matter? Okay, so I would like to make a proposal that we grant this permission. And we're going to do by a raise of hands, or would you like to take a roll call? So, do you want a second?
Sorry, well, I will second that, but James at the very start mentioned a couple of slight amendments to the recommendation. So I'm assuming that's grant permission with those.
I jumped the
amendments. But I'm happy to second
Subject to the amendment.
that. Yeah, I'm very
Yep.
happy to second that.
Okay,
Support the
so subject to the amendments, propose that we grant permission for this application, seconded by Councillor Wharton. And Councillor, Councillor Taylor, you're abstaining?
I'm abstaining.
So could we just show of hands who would be happy to grant this permission? And abstentions? Refusals? Thank you. The numbers for that? Do you want to just announce the numbers for that? Okay, that was granted. We have the numbers there. So thank you very much. If you want to make your exit quick while you still can. Thank you, James. Councillor Taylor?
A point of clarification, if I may, Chair. Now that you've stated after the vote that the application has been granted, has that application got planning approval now or when the decision notice is written? Thank you.
I think Councillor Officer Bailey is going to deal with that one.
Latter, the basis. Members resolve to approve, as they've just done tonight, and a decision notice has to be issued in order to grant planning permission, subject to the Section 106. So the two are issued simultaneously, but the actual planning permission is granted when the decision in Section 106, when the Section 106 is signed and the planning permission issued. That's when it's granted. But what members have done tonight is they've resolved to grant planning permission under the terms of the papers that you've seen.
You happy with that, Councillor Tone? Oh, no. Okay, thank you. We move on to our second application for this evening, land opposite the Paddocks, Burling Road, Leybourne. We have a report by Officer Field, if you'd like to take over.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks to vary conditions 3 and 4 of the appeal decision to allow the siting of 2 additional static caravans and 2 utility rooms within the existing pitches. This slide shows the layout plan approved under the discharge of condition application condition 4. These 2 here are the static caravans, the blue ones are the touring caravans, and then you've got some utility buildings, and the other bits on here are the car parking areas. This is the proposed plan. These are the 2 additional static caravans, and these will be the 2 additional day rooms or utility rooms. These are the elevations of the utility room. And just to set out some material considerations, there is a demonstrable unmet need for this type of development proposed. The inspector's comments and the imposition of the conditions were formed having regard for the site's location within the Greenbelt under the policies at that time. There has been a change to national planning policy since the appeal decision was allowed. This is a material consideration. The site would comprise grey-belt land and as such would be appropriate development under the new MPPF. Proposal does not increase the number of pitches. The introduction of 2 static caravans and 2 utility rooms would not intensify the use of the site to that which would impact on the character of the area and the neighbouring amenity. The grey-belt land, there are no policies in the framework that would provide a strong reason for refusing the development proposed. Therefore, the reason set out in the committee report, your officer's recommendation is to approve, subject to conditions. Also, if members are minded to approve, it is also proposed to add a standard informative reminding the applicant to apply for a licence. Chair.
Thank you. We have a number of speakers. Our first speaker is actually going to speak on behalf of themselves and another speaker. So if speaker one would like to come to this second, you sit in the first seat and you use the second mic. So you will have 6 minutes to speak. I will start when you are ready.
Thank you. Speak on behalf of Labour and Westmoreland residents who have for the past 4 years had their human rights violated and the peaceful enjoyment to their homes obliterated following the setup of this encampment, which this planning application pertains to and all that has come with it. For context, 4-acre agricultural site with covenants was purchased in 2020 and the planning application for a horse stable submitted. In June 2021, residents, special needs adults and children using both the disabled riding stable and the Rosebud Hospital were put in fear and had to remain inside as large HGV lorries with caravans bombed down this quiet road in Westmoreland. One lorry driver said, and I quote, that the plan is to put 50 caravans on this site. The road is one of the main entrances to Leybourne Chase. The purchase of this site and the planning applications for stables was under false pretences. Following this siege-like event, ancient trees and green belts were destroyed and matters continue. TNBC planning failed to issue an injunction. Following this, a fire on the site took place as local people slept. Nobody was on the encampment. Ongoing antisocial behaviour, criminal damage and further illicit development took place without regards to the orders of the TNBC planning department or the English planning laws. 4 known local families have moved, citing the encampment and the damage it has done to our community as a reason. The taxpayer has spent an estimated £500,000 due to the site. Finns provided temporary conditions for the occupants, whose illicit development is usurping the development controls. Residents urge that the committee reject the variation to the condition based on 1, quantum of development and violation of previous conditions. The application seeks to increase the number of static caravans beyond the limits set by the inspectorate. This is a direct violation of the 5-year conditions set on this temporary site by the inspectorate. 2, Labour and Westmoreland Parish Council and 52 representations have objected to this application, notably allowing the proposed development would precedent for disregarding established planning conditions and undermine the integrity of the planning process. It is crucial to uphold the conditions set forth by the inspector to maintain the integrity of the site and its surroundings. 3, the assertion of grey belt status as per the new MPPF by the TNBC planning officer is incorrect, and misapplication of grey belt status has been asserted without reference to the new Gypsy Traveller framework that has to be considered in parallel. Policy of the traveller sites in Greenbelt, paragraph 17 states, Greenbelt boundaries should be altered only in exceptional circumstances. If a local planning authority wishes to make an exceptional, limited alteration to the defined Greenbelt boundaries to meet a specific identified need for a traveller site, it should only do so through the plan making process and not in response to a planning application, which this is. TNBC planning are now suggesting that lands be removed from Greenbelt and deemed grey belt in response to this planning application, as said. It is clear from Para 17, Government Planning for Traveller Sites, December 2024, that removing Greenbelt, altering Greenbelt is not permitted in response to a planning application. Furthermore, case law, Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames versus the Secretary of State in 2023, Mrs. Justice Levine stated, ruled on a case where both the MPPF and the GT policy were not referenced together. At its most simple, she said, this is because he failed to take into account the MPPF, which states in terms that it must be read with the traveller site policy. Number 4, covenants and restrictions. TNBC planning has stated there are not any covenants or restrictions on this land. The title deed of this land does include covenants, and TNBC and Kent County Council restricted the development of a scout hut on this site when the parish council tried to purchase the land some years ago because of the agricultural restrictions of covenant. TNBC planning should have this information on file or should work with KCC to obtain. The current TNBC planning office does not make mention of these restrictions, nor seems to be aware of them, so their planning recommendation is again inaccurate. Former head of the parish council does know the full history of the site, has stated that the local community is being let down massively should a further violation and the increase of the site be permitted. Number 5, dominance. An aerial view and a street view of the site has been shared, and it is clear visually that the site does dominate. A planning officer will work on an application either from home or here at Gibson Drive in what is really a rather academic exercise, cutting and pasting parts of the NPPF policies with which to justify their leaning. Those that live locally and as has been pictorially represented to all of you here on the planning portal can clearly see the dominance of the site. At night, the site is referred to locally as the Gatwick runway, such as the glare of the encampment's lights, and is far more obtrusive to the landscape than the neighbouring landscape of 800 homes at Labourn Chase. Local plan. Again, as everyone will be aware, Tunbridge and Woodling failed to negotiate effectively with the neighbouring councils, leaving us without a local plan. The temporary site use provisioned on a 5-year temporary basis by PINS considered the absence of a local plan to be of material consideration. For TNPC to again cite this as a reason for this application when the site has already been granted temporary rights based on the absence of a local plan is a nonsense. It has been stated that the additional units are not for any additional occupants and that the units are for storage, are in storage. Why then should the community have to be further impacted to allow further the relocation of units in storage? And in addition, it is to note that when the agricultural land was purchased, the title deed shows household addresses, i.e. bricks and mortar houses belonging to the owners of the site, and they were not part of Tunbridge and Malling Borough. To cite a further need relating to the absence of the local plan as material is again another failure. Lastly, 7, community. As mentioned in the context at the beginning, this site is destroying our local community. On behalf of residents in the local community, all of whom follow planning law and contribute positively to the community, we implore you to do the right thing.
Thank you. We now have speaker number 2. We need to they speak to that. It's on. I'll do the 3 minutes once you're
speaking to that.
Yeah. Well, not too close if you want to be seen.
Several justifications for rejecting this violation of previous conditions. Proposal seeks to exceed the previously established limit on static caravan, directly contravening conditions set by the Planning Inspectorate. Impact on greenbelt openness. Introducing 2 more static caravans would further compromise the openness of greenbelt, which is contrary to the National Planning Policy Framework that prioritises its preservation. Lack of very special circumstances. The applicant has not demonstrated any very special circumstances that would warrant this development in greenbelt, as merely relocating 2 units from storage does not suffice. Approving this application would pave the way for similar requests, jeopardising the integrity of planning conditions and leading to further intrusions into greenbelt land. Visual and noise pollution. Increased development will result in greater visual and noise pollution, adversely affecting local residents and the rural character of the area. Complaints regarding these issues are currently under review by planning and enforcement. Insufficient landscaping. There are sufficient concerns about the existing landscaping and screening, which do not integrate well with the surrounding countryside. The remarks made by a Bristol-based planning inspector during a brief visit do not reflect the local experience or the community's heritage related to Leybourne Woods. The local objections emphasise that the site is not suitable for this area. Environmental concerns. There are serious worries about the potential impact on local wildlife and the environment, particularly regarding the habitats and biodiversity results. Results for an environmental assessment have not been addressed by planning. Temporary nature of current permission. The existing permission is temporary and the site is intended to revert to its original state after this period, suggesting that further development should not occur. Community sentiment. The significant number of objections from local residents and parish council reflects overwhelming public concern regarding this application. As members of the Planning Committee, you hold the responsibility to represent the hundreds of residents in Westmoreland who have voiced their concerns and objections since 2021. You have the authority to reject this planning application. It's essential that the representation on the Planning Committee remains trustworthy, aligned with the community interests. Approving this application would only compound that dissatisfaction. Allowing this development would undermine the council's role and erode public confidence in that planning's regulations are being respected.
Thank you. Can I have speaker number 3, please? The residents believe that the planning office has wrongly classed this land as grey belt. It is land that is surrounded by other green belts, and to class it as grey belt would not be in keeping with the local area. Also, the planning policy for traveller sites clearly states in policy E, paragraph 17, read that before, green belt boundaries should be altered only in exceptional circumstances. If a local planning authority wishes to make an exceptional limited alteration to the defined green belt boundary, which might be to accommodate a site inset within the green belt to meet a specific identified need for a traveller site, it should do so only through the plan making process and not in response to a planning application. If land is removed from the green belt in this way, it should be specifically allocated in the development plan as a traveller site only. In fact, when it comes to grey belt land, government are still seeking views on how the proposals under the MPPF would apply to traveller sites, particularly concerning the sequential test to guide release, the definition of grey belt and PDL. Also, policy H states, determining planning applications for travelling sites, paragraph 26. Local planning authorities, your good selves, should very strictly limit new traveller site developments in open countryside, that is away from existing settlements or outside areas allocated in the development plan. Local planning authorities should ensure that sites in rural areas respect the scale of and do not dominate the nearest settled community. Paragraph 4 says that plan making and decision taking should protect Greenbelt from inappropriate development. F, that plan making and decision taking should aim to reduce the number of unauthorised developments and encampments and make enforcement more effective. K, for local planning authorities to have due regard to the protection of local amenity and local environments. Sites in rural areas and the countryside policy C, when assessing the suitability of sites in rural or semi-rural settings, local planning authorities should ensure that the scale of such sites does not dominate the nearest settled community. Doubling the sites by allowing more static caravans and washrooms would make the site double the size it is. The National Planning Policy Framework, December 2024, protects green belt land. The government attaches great importance to green belts. Once established, green belt boundaries should only be altered where exceptional circumstances are fully evidenced and justified through the preparation or updating of plan. When defining green belt boundaries, plans should make clear that the safeguarded land is not allocated for development at the present time. Planning permission for the permanent development of safeguarded land should only be granted following an update to a plan which proposes development. We urge you not to allow this to happen. Thank you. Can I have a speaker 4, please?
That's not a problem.
No, it's going with all. Councillor Cripps, can you actually hear what we're saying? We seem to be having some interference from the mics.
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, can everybody else hear? I know it's very annoying, but can everybody else hear from here? Okay, we appear to be. Oh, it's gone now. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. This seems to be a classic case of the answer is yes, but the policy context by the case officers used to support the application. Had the answer simply been no, the same policy context could have been used to dismiss the application. It isn't actually an application for development, temporary use that was permitted by the inspector under tenuous reasons, which are obvious that he didn't particularly want to go against it, but because Tunbridge and Morling don't have adequate provision for gypsy and traveller site, that they choosing to use this one. The application seeks to increase the number of caravans from 6 to 8, an increase of 1/3. More significantly, the static caravans from 2 to 4, which is a 100% increase. So how you can say that this is not a material consideration as to why this should be refused as an application for varying a condition, it should realistically, on this basis, been rejected and ask the applicant politely to, at the very least, to resubmit his application so it could be considered as in entirety. So it takes into account, again, promote peaceful and integrated coexistence between the site and local community, provide for proper consideration of the effect of local environment quality, such as air and noise quality, get a proper highway consideration into the fact that it is a dual use lane, so that you've effectively got pedestrians and traffic in the same thing. So to say that there is no increase in traffic generation and safety issues is unfounded. So I would ask the committee here, please, to consider rejecting this application as it should have been done in the first place, and ask for a full, detailed, fresh application if they want to increase capacity on. Thank you. Thank you.
That's all of our speakers. Mr. Bailey would like to have a go first.
I'll probably.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I'll just have to speak a bit louder than normal. Okay, I just wanted to address a couple of points that have been raised by the speakers before we get into the debate. Not that I'm going to go into the debate matters, but there's a couple of things that I just wanted to share to members, and I'm just going to share my screen. So if you could just bear with me, because it relates around the acceptability. Oops, I'll put that on there. So I just wanted to address the first point was about the Section 73 and the legitimacy of submitting an application, because a lot of been mentioned by the speakers in terms of a breach of the current conditions. And this is from the NPPG, which is the National Planning Policy Guidance. So it's the government's website, and it clearly sets out how can a proposal that has planning permission be amended. And when you scroll down through it on the bullet point, as I'm just going to refer to here, amending the conditions attached to the planning permission, including seeking to make minor material amendments. Effectively, when you go into this becomes amending the conditions attached to a permission application under Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act. So what you've got in front of you is a legitimate application that seeks to amend an application through the proper channels and process. So I just need to address that point. So members of the committee, a proper application has been done and the applicants are seeking to amend the conditions as set out formally in the government's national NPPG. So it is a proper and legitimate application coming forward, and it is a legitimate proposal that an applicant can amend an existing permission, which is what this application seeks to address. I just wanted to address the other point. A mention was also mentioned around redefining the green belt. This application doesn't seek to redefine the green belt. It is still green belt by definition. What the report sets out is the fact that the officer considers, in terms of the professional officer's view, that this is a grey belt. So just because it's grey belt, it doesn't come out of being green belt. So it remains green belt. The application doesn't seek to amend that green belt designation. What it does do is say it makes an opinion on the basis that it considers that the officer considers that this is grey belt. So I just needed to clarify that this application doesn't seek to redefine or amend green belt boundaries. It remains as that, and the only way you can do that is through the local plan process, as one of the speakers already raised. So that is legitimate, but I just need members on the basis that this application is not seeking to rearrange or redress green belt boundaries. So thank you, and I'll sort of hand back to members for the debate. Thank you very much.
Okay. If I could ask one question, there was a mention of a time limit on the application of 5 years. So when is that up? When is that?
I think there's a couple of years to go.
Okay, so two more years for the, and then I guess they can apply to extend that.
They could do. The appeal decision was dated the 7th of December 2022, and it was granted for 5 years.
Right. Okay.
It will be open to the applicants to either to seek to apply again or seek to apply for a permanent permission. Obviously, by that stage, you'd have a new local plan, a new Egyptian Traveller Showcase Assessment that will be published as an evidence base to underpin the local plan coming forward, because obviously we'll be submitting under the current LDS timetable, we'll be submitting to the inspectorate in December 26 with an examination in public in around June or early summer of 27. So by the time the permission's up, and that will obviously have policies on G&T policies, and it will be underpinned by an up-to-date evidence base.
Councillor Boxall, you called this in. Would you like to speak first?
Cool, thank you. So before you, as you already heard, we have an application to increase what I would say the density or the amount of caravans on the site in Burling Road. The original application for this site was called in before my time on the council and was rejected by this council and then overruled by the inspector, as we've heard, dated on the 7th of December. This ruling gave permission to temporarily allow development on Greenbelt land or agricultural land, marked Greenbelt, and to allow 6 caravans under the condition 3 for a 5-year period, of which then condition 1 would apply, which is the removal of all caravans, buildings, structures, etc., and restore the land back to its previous condition. It's worth noting that this application was submitted in March 2024 and was called in within the timeframe, but obviously that was prior to any government changes in policy. And most noticeably, the change in policy around Greenbelt and now what we know as Greybelt. The main reason for the delay in it coming to committee, as I understand it, is there was some inconsistencies on the application that needed to be checked by the officer. That was subsequently done, and hence why that application now sits before us today. It's worth remembering as well, this call-in is not to call in against what the inspector ruled. Not even I'm that brave or stupid. But it is a call-in, is what the call-in is about, what is on paper and what is on this application, not any breaches of condition or what the inspector set out in his report. What I want to draw your attention to is point 7.30 in the report. And this deals with the encroachment issue. And I'd like to just put forward a counter argument to, I think, some of the things we've touched on already around the new MPPF situation. So while paragraph 143 of the MPPF lists safeguarding for the countryside from encroachment as a key purpose for the Greenbelt, it does not explicitly exclude its relevance when assessing Greybelt land. The absence of a direct reference does not imply that the principle of preventing encroachment should be disregarded when considering this development. Furthermore, even if this development is not deemed to fundamentally undermine the green belt, any degree of encroachment could contribute to cumulative harm over time, gradually eroding the function of openness of the green belt. The scale of this development should not be viewed in isolation, as incremental loss of semi-rural or buffer land could lead to a precedent for further encroachment, weakening the strategic objectives of the Greenbelt policy as outlined in the MPPF. The Greenbelt has 5 main purposes, as we've already discussed, one of which is to prevent urban sprawl from protecting the countryside. And to protect the countryside. While Greenbelt is not, why Greybelt is not formally defined in the MPPF, it typically refers to the land that is partially developed or of lower environmental quality, but still contributes to greenbelt functions. The key argument here is just because a specific policy does not explicitly list safeguarding the countryside from encroachment as a test for the grey belt land, it does not mean that the principle should be ignored when accessing for development proposals. The overall purpose of the green belt remains relevant, and protecting the countryside from gradual development should still be a consideration, even if the site in question is classified as grey belt rather than the traditional green belt. If we think about what the inspector wrote or granted, the number was 6 site or pitches or caravans on this site, not 8, and therefore that could be deemed as larger encroachment. Therefore, if we take all that into account, and I'd like to see the officer's feedback on those points, I would ask or urge members to vote to protect our green belt further.
Thank you. Would you like to come back to that? Yeah.
Can you just remind me what paragraph the committee report you were referring to?
That's on encroachment 143 of the MPPF.
Okay, you didn't reference the committee. Oh, no, okay.
7.3.
7.3 in your report, sorry.
Yeah. 7 point.
Yeah, sorry.
7.3, I got it. Okay. There is a definition in the MPPF for grey belt. It's been clearly defined. So, and the starting point, yes, you're right. The site is green belt, as Mr. Bailey said, and that doesn't change. But the next test, as per the new MPPF, is whether or not it's grey belt. And whilst there are 5 purposes to the green belt, under the grey belt assessment and how it's assessed, you are only allowed to consider get this right now. I'll find it. I think I've got it in mind. Oh, sorry, A, B, and D. So yes, you are correct that under the green belt assessment, we would consider the 5 purposes A, B, C, and D, and E. But under a grey belt assessment, which you have to carry out, we have to consider whether the site is grey belt. You then only are allowed to consider A, B, and D. So in effect, I mean, this particular one is inappropriate development in the green belt, but it does meet the definition of grey belt. Now, you can have a circumstance where it might be appropriate development in green belt, but doesn't meet the definition of grey belt. But how I've done the test, or explaining that very well, am I? It's how I've set it out in the committee report. So I've gone through the assessment and I've gone through what you're allowed to do under the assessment for green belt. And there are obviously a certain criteria under there that you would be appropriate development. And one of the ones I considered, this is under paragraph 154, one of the ones I considered was previously developed land, whether it be infilling in the green belt. But obviously it isn't because it's a temporary permission, so it fails on that score. The way we have to assess it then is I have to look to see whether it meets the new grey belt test. And that's what I carried out. And that's what I've done. And in considering that, I am only allowed to consider A, B, and D. So the option C under the grey belt test isn't for consideration. So when you assess it under the grey belt rules, then it comes out that the site is appropriate development in the green belt or in the grey belt. That is, I can't explain it I can't take bit from one and then a bit for another and put them together and decide what to come up with. The assessment is it appropriate development in the green belt? Yes or no? And then does it meet the test for grey belt? Yes, it does.
Wish to add to that, and I don't want to sort of confuse members on the grey belt definitions. I think the report, there is a sort of a structure that we have to go through in terms of the 5 purposes, in terms of green belt, and obviously then the tests that we have to do under the relevant paragraphs of the NPPF in terms of grey belt, because obviously, you're not applying the whole criteria, and that's how the government managed to effectively allow development to come forward by redefining effectively green belt in certain areas as grey belt. I won't go into too much detail on that, but what I did want to raise the issue of further encroachment. What members would have to appreciate is the planning unit has a grant for planning permission. This application does not change the planning unit per se. What it does is increases the number of statics, which were the inspector limited to 2, increases that to 4. So the planning unit is not changing. What goes on within the planning unit is controlled and limited by the condition. So this application, what members really need to consider on the basis is what landscape impact. Those are 2 additional caravans, because we're not increasing the planning unit size. Planning unit stays exactly as it is. The pitches stay exactly as they are. There's 4 pitches, they're not increasing. What is increasing is the number of statics within 2 of those pitches. So you've got 2 additional statics and 2 day rooms. So the reality of that is the planning sphere is not changing at all. So there is no further encroachment because the planning unit remains the same. What there is potentially, and members have to consider, is effectively what you're considering. What is the greater impact by 2 additional caravan statics and 2 day rooms? And that's what members are considering, because with the Section 73 application, you can't look behind the planning permission. The planning permission is there. This is a substitute, an either or permission. That original permission stays. So the original permission that the inspector granted remains. This is a permission that effectively, if granted, would sit alongside it. And the applicants have the ability to implement either or permission. So that's what the ability is. But what you can't do in a Section 73 is go behind the original permission. You can only look at the conditions. So there are limitations imposed on the original permission. And I know someone previously did say, one of the speakers said they should submit a proper planning application. Well, they are doing that. And that is what effectively, as I previously referred to, what the MPPG allows you to do to seek to amend those conditions. And it is quite standard in gypsy traveller cases in terms of where the needs of the family change, family needs arise, new additions arise, and then those conditions would need to be amended. And that's what this application seeks to do on that basis. So I just wanted to sort of let members know it's not in the reality the further encroachment, because it's all contained within that original planning unit. And that's quite a key factor in the consideration of this application. So thank you, Chair.
Councillor Borden.
Thank you very much. I might come back later because I've just been frantically Googling the NPPG in relation to grey belts, but I wanted to, I'll just make a comment and then I'm going to ask quite a direct question. So my comment is this. I remember when this was an unauthorised encampment because I got a lot of correspondence about it. And I think that is one of the reasons why the neighbours, quite rightly, feel so passionately about this. The way that this came to be a gypsy and traveller site was appalling, frankly. And the council did, through its enforcement team, did the right thing. And unfortunately, the planning inspector, as we've heard, granted permission for a temporary permission for 5 years. Now, what happens in 2027 is anyone's guess, but I'm interested. I would be interested to sort of consider, if we grant this tonight, sort of what happens if in 2027, really, in relation to to a potential permanent permission that might be applied for. Looking at 7.22, which sets out sections A, B, and D of paragraph 143. The question that I think this committee's got to answer is whether this application meets any of those tests. And that's very difficult in an application like this. James mentioned about landscape impact, and that's something that's relevant too. Because were we not to have had the grey belt definition, my question to officers is, would we have a reason for refusal? And the answer is yes, because the officers have nodded their head. But this is the first of, I suspect, a very long line of applications that are going to come before this committee and this council, where we're going to start assessing the grey belt rather than the green belt. And in my view, the grey belt policy is a terrible policy, particularly for places like Tunbridge and Moorland Borough Council, because, like your regular reminder, that planning is essentially a legal process, and our job here as a regulatory committee is to assess this based off the National Planning Policy Framework and associated planning guidance. And the government have made this even harder by introducing this concept of the grey belts. And I feel very sorry for all of the residents here from Leybourne and Westmoreland, because the government have made it even harder for them. And this is just a succession of things that have gone against them for no fault of their own, starting with the fact that that the application that simply overnight the caravans arrived. That was my understanding of what happened. I mean, that's appalling. Think of that happening over your house. And now we've got the grey belt that comes in, which in essence turns an application that would have been refused at the point that they submitted this in March 2024 into a recommendation to approve, because this has come out in the intervening period. And that isn't to say that I'm going to support the application site. I need to do a little bit more Googling about planning policy guidance, and I would like to listen to the debate. But the officers kind of answered my question by nodding their heads, in that this would be probably a refusal had we not had the grey belt. And I think that's a crying shame. Thank you.
Officer Field, would you like to?
I do just want to come back on that. You asked me a specific question about this particular site. So in this case, yes, it would have been a refusal, but that's because it's a temporary permission. So had it been a permanent gypsy traveller site, it would have been previously developed land. So then it's not necessarily setting a precedent for loads of other gypsy sites to sort of become grey belt. And just on, had it been determined at the time it came in, yes, as you say, it would have been refused, but we probably would be at appeal, and the inspector would be considering it under grey belt as well.
I have got a number of other speakers, but Mr. Bailey would like to come back as well.
Just, I think Councillor Porter highlighted that fact. I mean, the council has, both officers and members have had to take a quite a significant change in terms of, you know, we've had a number of public inquiries that on green belt that we've had to sort of change stack and not actually defend purely on the publication of the MPPF and the change in terms of the introduction to grey belt. So we have had to deal, because it is now a significant material planning consideration in terms of the change that the government have imposed. So, you know, it's not just on this application, it's on housing applications that we've had to take a change. You know, started off with the Hadlow application in terms of housing. So it is an issue that up and down the country, councils are having to change in applications that have been determined or at appeal. They've had to change their stance and either decided, actually, if it's grey belt, then potentially it's not inappropriate development by definition. You don't have to demonstrate very special circumstances. So this isn't just applicable to Tunbridge and Moorling. It's applicable up and down the country, where, you know, in December, government changed the policy and instantly that became a significant material planning consideration. So, as I said, it's not just on this application or gypsy and traveller applications, it's on housing applications and on the moto application in terms of the inspector approved it on the basis of grey belt. So it is having quite a significant impact up and down the country, I would say. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much. I think the paragraphs in the report 717, 718, 719 are very, very important, where they refer to the fact that this is a temporary planning permission and doesn't confer PDL. I'd like a slight clarification. If by some miracle this gets approved tonight, I presume that's only an approval until December 2027, when the inspector's temporary permission expires. And at that point, does this land revert to green belt? Thank you.
Well, the land still is green belt. That hasn't changed, but yes, it is still a this would grant permission temporary, and it would run out at the same time as the appeal decision.
And I do wonder whether we actually have the power here to overturn an inspector's decision, because that's what we've been asked to do. I think from a legal point of view, we should refuse it and let an inspector deal with his own decision. Thank you.
Officer Bailey would like to come back on that one.
Sorry, I have to come back on you, Mike, on that, because you don't have that power, and you're not overturning inspector's decision. As I said previously, these permissions sit in parallel. Can't take away. There is a power to rescind a planning permission, but that's not what you're asking to do today. That's under a different part of the Act, and there's compensation. So what this does, this application, is the original permission remains intact. The appeal decision, this effectively, if granted tonight, would sit alongside it, and the applicant would have the option to either run with their existing permission or decide to go with this permission. Can't effectively supersede. The only time that can happen, as you heard at the London Golf, is when there's a voluntary revocation of the permission, which happened under the terms of the 106. This is not what's happening on this application.
To come back, yeah.
Just to clarify, this permission, if granted tonight, ends in December 2027 with the existing temporary permission.
Correct. The applicant would have to reapply either for a permanent or for a further temporary permission. But when they do reapply, obviously, by that stage, we should have a new local plan, a new GTAA, and obviously new policies in the local plan under which that would be assessed. And obviously, you may have a change in government policy, but I don't know.
Councillor Tanner.
Thank you, Chair. I also remember when this application came to us, whenever it was, 2022, I believe, and temporary permission was granted, as I understand it, to allow for schooling. In my opinion, to submit an application to increase the number of homes within just 2 years is inappropriate, doesn't sit right with me at all. And we have seen in other traveller camps within our borough where actually families have grown, and to allow the schooling, temporary permissions were allowed for, I think it was 20 years, until such time as a permanent permission was granted. So on that basis, I agree completely with the local member, and I will not be supporting this application. Thank you.
Councillor Tanner.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify whether the landscaping that was required under the condition, the fencing and I think boundary hedging outside of that, whether that's actually been provided, or is that all in place? And the other thing I noticed when looking at Google Earth is that immediately to the south of the hard standing, outside of where the hedging would be, there's a sort of paraphernalia, golden paraphernalia appearing. So there's this sort of encroachment there, coming back to that word. And I wonder whether that's controlled at all, that was outside of the site boundary. What's the situation with that? I just see this site exploding, if I can put it that way.
Okay, I've done the same. I've actually visited the site as well, obviously, but I've also done the same Google map, which I think is quite old. It's not a Google map. When I visited the site, they were clearly within the confines of the area that's been granted. There wasn't any encroachment outside of that area. In regard to the landscaping, condition 4 has been approved. My understanding is it hasn't all been implemented, but that there was an error when that condition was discharged, and the time condition that was in the cover letter wasn't put on the approved decision notice. So therefore, we are unable to enforce for them to actually implement it in the time that it was required. Now, there are still quite a bit of landscaping that has been done. This application will obviously, if members were minded to grant, as James Bailey says, is a separate permission. It runs alongside. So this one in some ways would regularise that error that was caused on the discharge of condition 4.
Councillor Tanner.
Chair, I just want to come back with a question, please, because I'd like to know why there is a possibility of this being designated as grey belt now, because before this encampment was created, there was nothing there. It was most definitely green belt. So I'd just be interested to know, is it this encampment that is now giving it the designation of grey belt? Thank you.
It is purely what's within the red edging that we have considered as grey belt. Nothing outside of that has been considered one way or the other. It is purely within the red edging that there is grey belt land. But as we have said, yes, it still is green belt, but assessed as grey belt under the new.
Councillor Bolton.
I will look to Councillor Boxall, given his remarks, as to whether he agrees with me, but just looking at the government guidance that was published in regards to how should the contribution land makes to the relevant greenbelt purposes be assessed, and looking at each of the purposes, I'm looking at purposes A, B and D as mentioned earlier under paragraph 143 of the MBPF. I'm going to discount B to prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another, because that clearly isn't the case here. And D to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns, because that clearly isn't the case here. But the guidance in relation to checking the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas really does boil down to the landscape impact, because if there is a weak contribution, then and I'm just going to read the guidance if that's helpful. Then assessment areas that make only a weak or no contribution are likely to include those that either are not adjacent to or near to a large built-up area, or are adjacent to or near to a large built-up area but containing or being largely enclosed by significant existing development. Well, Leybourne Chase, which is probably the nearest built-up area, I wouldn't consider a large built-up area, and certainly there's no planning policy that would determine this as a large built-up area. A large built-up area, as far as my understanding of this is, would be a town like Tunbridge, for example. And the second point, as I reference, basically, is it contained or largely enclosed by significant existing development? Well, I don't think it is, because the development that, as Susan pointed out at the very start, we are looking at existing structures on the northern part of the development site. This is encroaching, under the old definition at least, into the green belt on the northeast of the development site. Now, therefore, that says there isn't a weak. We've got probably a moderate contribution towards towards the test at paragraph 143A. So if the committee were minded to refuse, I think that is probably the ground in which it might want to go for, rather, because it's the only one which could undermine the argument that this is grey belt land. And I think that's in essence what we're getting at here. And I really feel quite sorry for Susan here, because this is although it's not, this application per se isn't a precedent, it's the first time we've had a grey belt discussion this area too, and it's very difficult for officers to write the report in that context. And my view is that actually this is quite a good application if the committee is wanting to be bold and really and Mike puts this in quite a flippant way, if I can say, but I think the nuance of what he said was actually, if we really want to test the inspector on basically the contribution at paragraph 143A, then this might be a good application to do so. Albeit, as James rightly said, we've had Court Lane in Hadlow, we've had the site at Platinum Way in Platt. Very appropriately, for this application, we've had Woodford on Old Lane in Ightham, all of which we've basically had to stop defending on Greenbelt grounds because of the grey belt policy. So it's going to be a tough sell if we refuse this. But to me, they're the grounds that, if you want to go for, it might be worth using should the committee want to refuse. Now, I appreciate officers will probably come back and defend what's in the paper, and that's what I fully expect them to do. But it's going to come down to a risk appetite from members at the end of the day as to how far they really want to push the envelope on this or not. So I hope that might help.
Sorry, I've just put up, as you can see, the approved site plan. So this was the original application. So when you talk about sprawl and it being, well, this application creating sprawl, it obviously isn't coming out of that confined that's already been granted. So the additional static caravan will go here and the other one would go here. And these utility buildings would be within this compound. So therefore, I think I would say that it doesn't create any sprawl into the countryside from that's already been approved. I think you should be cautious if you are going to recommend it under that Area A.
Anybody else would like to speak? Okay, now the sorry, I didn't see your hand. Sorry, Bill.
I end up quick enough. Sorry about that.
Councillor Banks.
Yeah, I listened basically to the debate and to the finer points, and I suppose it does come back to me from the point of view of really 720, where basically, whilst the publication of the new NFPPF does not alter the fundamental principles of the green belt land. And I think the whole thing is looking at this, it seems to me that this does basically change the fundamental principles of the green belt land. I think it's very difficult from the point of view of being squashed back into having to choose between A, B, and C. We have furrowed our brows looking at it to try and actually make something out of it. But I think it is incredibly difficult, and I think it's I think Matt has had a good go at it, and I think it's it was worthwhile doing that. But at the end of it all, it's a situation that the number of caravans gone up, and I think the whole thing is, and so in actual fact, the density has gone up, and so I think in actual fact there is, in my view, an encroachment. So I think I would like to actually move Councillor Boxall's proposal to a vote.
We didn't actually had a proposal yet. Mr. Taylor, would you like to come back?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, Bill makes a very good point. But we got so tied up with the discussions about PDL A, B, C, and D that we've forgotten that Greenbelt only has to be open and permanent, and that's the end of it. The rest of it is just minor definitions around that point. Thank you.
Okay, Officer Bailey.
I think before members go, and I mean, obviously, I haven't heard a motion, I haven't heard any grounds yet. I know Councillor Borton put forward some suggestions, but also what Councillor Borton didn't mention in terms of the purposes, you've also got to add, you know, whilst you've got to, you obviously check A, B, and D, but part of the requirement is it says does not strongly contribute to any of the purposes. So it's not just a question whether you can make an argument whether it fulfills A, B, or D. It doesn't strongly contribute, and that's one of the key elements in there, which is one of the key changes in terms of the NPPF. So, you know, it adds another burden. Not only do they knock out ground C, which is impact on the countryside, you've also got to argue that it strongly contributes. But I haven't heard at the current time what the grounds are, so I can't comment in terms of what a potential refusal would look like. So at the moment, I think I would probably have to ask members on the basis of what the grounds are. But then I'd also say that officers have made a professional view that the site is considered to be grey belt. So if members were to refuse it, the applicants are going to come back on appeal to say that they consider it's grey belt, and by definition, it's appropriate development in the green belt, and therefore you don't have to demonstrate any of the very special circumstances. It is appropriate development by definition, and officers have made that recommendation already. Obviously, it's up to members to make the decision how they go tonight, and I'll wait for the grounds that are cited or what members are looking at. So maybe I'll leave it for now, and then we'll see where the grounds come.
Officer, Councillor Boxall, did you want to make any more? Oh, Orton?
Well, I'm not going to put forward grounds. I'm just going to, sorry, Mike and Bill, extend the minutiae of the debate a little bit. Not because me and James can't do that any other time. James and I can talk about planning for hours, but I do want to explore this a little bit further because I think this is the absolute heart of the issue. Now, James is right in that does not strongly contribute is important. So what I'm saying is, yes, I think there is a moderate contribution, but then I look at the definition of strong contributions. And again, there's basically two definitions. Is it adjacent to or near a large built-up area? Well, no, as said earlier. If developed, would it result in an incongruous pattern of development? I don't know if Susan's able to just flick onto the slide before, which shows the proposal. That's the current to show the proposal one, or the slide after. Or is there another slide? That's it for. Okay, yeah. So fundamentally, boiling this down is whether the additional 2 static units result in an incongruous pattern of development in the Greenbelt. That's the question, really, as far as I can see here, because that is the illustrative features, to use the words of the guidance, that we've got to assess this under in order to meet the definition of strong. As I said earlier, I think it meets moderate. The question is, does it meet strong in order to overcome that? I think, James, that's the heart of the issue. Now, by the way, I'm not criticising the officers for their recommendation at all. As I said earlier, I think the officer recommendation is what the officers had to put in, given the guidance. The difference is, us as councillors have got to establish how far we want to push the boat for this council on going to defend something that is actually quite a technical appeal. Officers' professional judgment, in my view, is probably, from their perspective, what they should be coming forward to a recommendation on. But ultimately, we as councillors have got to take the decision about how far we push the boat out on something like this, given that we know grey belt is a huge issue. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, anybody else would like to speak? So, Councillor Boxall, do you wish to make a proposal, and if so, on what grounds?
Firstly, thank you, Councillor Borton, for your quick Googling of a policy that is new to a lot of us and ever changing. Therefore, I will put forward a proposal to reject this application. And please do help me with the wording, officers. Around it, it must fall around the point A to check the unrestricted sprawl of large areas, and then, as Matt alluded to, the 2 sections there, the incongruous of development would be the main nub of the issue. I would need some assistance with the wording.
I think on that basis, as previously, we need to sort of construct a ground. So I would suggest that we'd need to adjourn, put some wording together, put that back to members. And then once we've got that wording together, if that's agreed, then we'd need to consider whether that can be substantiated. Because obviously we're into the territory whether it can be substantiated on appeal. But I think we need to construct the grounds first to see how that looks. So I would suggest if we have an adjournment for 5-10 minutes, if that's okay. 10 minutes allow us to construct something, and we can come back to members.
Councillor Banks, do you want to second the?
Yes, just for the sake of clarity, I'd like to second.
Okay. Okay, if we now have an adjournment for back here at 22, and we can then work our way through on a vote or on the proposal. Okay, if you'd like to take a break, there are facilities that you can use outside. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if we could reconvene. I've lost Victoria. Now, we just need to wait for Victoria to come back. There she is. Okay, we have a proposal by Councillor Boxall, seconded by Councillor Banks, which is to be read out by Officer Field, which we will then vote on. Would you like to go ahead, Officer Field?
The proposal, by reason of the introduction of 2 additional static caravans and 2 day units, would result in an incongruous form of development, which would result in sprawl of the existing site, which strongly contributes to the Greenbelt purposes, paragraph 154A of the MPPF 2024. As such, would be inappropriate with development for which no very special circumstances have been demonstrated to outweigh the harm caused by the inappropriateness. Did I? Oh, 143, sorry.
So okay, Officer Bailey, would you like to?
No, I just think, yeah, if that's okay. If I mean, obviously, that's for members to then debate to see whether that ground is sufficient for them. And then obviously, before we go to the vote, if we could then come back to me, if that's okay on that basis, before we end up going to the vote. But obviously, it's for members to debate whether that's sufficient. That captures what they were considering.
Would anybody like to speak to the proposal? Nobody. So I presume that you're all happy with it, or do you want it reread? No? Okay. I'm happy to go to a vote then.
Before we go to the vote, members, on the basis of constitutional requirements, I might have to ask the legal officer to step in and outline what those issues are. But the issue is in terms of whether the ground can be substantiated on appeal. And in terms of the officer view is that I don't consider those grounds could be substantiated on appeal. So I'm not saying at this stage about significant costs. I'm not mentioning that. I'm just literally highlighting on the basis for constitutional requirements that I don't think that that ground can be substantiated. And then I need to hand over to the legal officer in terms of the implication of that arising from the constitutional matters. So if I could hand over to Joy in this instance to address that point. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, if you're obviously as officers have considered it from the professional viewpoint that the grounds which have been put forward cannot be substantiated, then we would obviously have to see how the vote goes tonight and have to invoke 15.25. So obviously we'd have to have a report prepared, a cost report prepared, and obviously if we've gone back and seen that can't be substantiated, the report will obviously offer advice. So the meeting will have to be deferred, and whatever vote tonight will be considered as a recommendation only. So yeah, let's see what happens when it goes to the vote. But obviously we might have to invoke the 15.25. So I just wanted to let you know beforehand. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. So we'll do a vote by roll call. So Victoria, can we hand over to you, please? So this is, you're voting on refusing this application based on the wording that the Officer Field has put together with Officer Bailey.
Thank you. Councillor Banks.
Voting for refusal.
For the proposal. For.
Councillor Borton.
I have to vote for.
Councillor Boxall.
For.
Councillor Coffin.
For.
Councillor Dean.
For.
Hudson.
For.
Councillor Lark.
For.
Councillor Loud.
For.
For. Councillor Tatton.
For.
Councillor Taylor.
For.
Councillor Palmer.
For. So that has been refused unanimously. But I do need to explain to the general public what that actually means. Do you want to put it in more professional terms than I can, Mr. Bailey?
Effectively, in terms of the Constitution, as the legal officer read out, what's been invoked is section 15.25 of the Constitution, which means, in effectively, whilst members have voted and resolved on this committee to refuse the application, effectively the application is deferred to a further meeting on the basis for a legal report to be compiled and presented to members under a Part 2 element. Members will consider those on likely cost implications, and the report will then be effectively debated again at that meeting. And should members decide on, in terms of which appropriate way to decide on that meeting. So for the purposes of tonight, members did resolve to refuse it, but that is not the decision. So this meeting now gets adjourned to another Area 2 committee meeting, and then where obviously the applicants who have spoken will have the same opportunity to speak again and present the arguments again at that subsequent meeting. So I hope that's clear for members of the public and for the applicants.
Can I just read? Yeah, so I'm just going to read that section out so that the members of the public can have that information to hand after the vote has taken place, just to supplement what you said. So 15.25 of the council's constitution in part 4 rules, committee procedure rules says that if contrary to a recommendation of the Director of Planning, Housing and Environmental Health, an area planning committee is minded to determine an application in a way or on grounds which the director does not consider can be substantiated, a resolution by the committee to make such a determination, which they have done tonight, will be a recommendation only, and the application shall stand adjourned to the next meeting of the committee to enable the Director of Central Services and Monitoring Officer to submit a report on the possibility of costs or compensation being awarded against the council in the event that the application is determined in that way. The second part of that section says, when we come back to the next meeting, if the Director of Central Services and Monitoring Officers report indicates that there is likely to be a risk of significant costs being awarded against the council at any appeal or a potential liability to pay compensation, the committee may not determine the application in a manner contrary to the advice set out in the report, and a resolution by the committee to make such a determination will be a recommendation only, and the application shall stand adjourned to the council for determination. So it might get to a point where we might have to go to full council, but it might not at the next meeting. So at that next meeting, you will be able to determine that based on what members decide and based on what the report says. Thank you.
Thank you. So that is the end of that particular application. Oh, sorry, Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Chairman. And I can imagine from the glazed eyes in the public gallery that people don't actually understand why that constitution is written in that way. And I do think it would be helpful when we do, not just to quote the Constitution, which is a lot of gobbledygook, but to explain why it's written that way.
Effectively, it's written that way to protect the council's position. The council obviously is a local planning authority, and costs obviously have to be borne by the public purse. So, most times it's not. Costs are not a material planning consideration when considering applications that come through to council, and obviously all the other material considerations that one takes into consideration. The main thing is we've got to just be clear that when councillors are making determining an application, they've listened to the advice from obviously the officers in the room, and they have all the information before them in order to be able to determine the application. So at this point, the cost report will be a further report that they would have to consider, and then still decide whether they want to go through with, obviously with refusing the application. But as I said, it's not a material consideration. It's just we have to consider the public purse when we make decisions on applications. But I don't know if that clarifies the reason why we have that in the Constitution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this application will be coming before this committee again, basically, once we've had another report and it goes through. Anybody who would like to depart after that application before we get to the next one, you're very willing to do so. We have our third application, but we're having a couple of technical issues. Okay, this application, our third one of the evening, is 119 Land, south of Windmill Hill, Rootham Heath, and Officer Edwards is going to present for us.
Good evening. This application for removal of a soil bund and erection of a 3-bedroom detached dwelling. Members did resolve to refuse this back in December, but as the decision wasn't issued prior to the new NPPF, there are new material considerations now based on the new NPPF, yes, so the main consideration is the introduction of grey belt, and our recommendation hasn't changed because the site is still considered to be green belt, and it is excluded from being identified as grey belt because of the protected areas within it, which are ancient woodland, and I think that's about it.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. This has come before us also because it's Councillor Mehmet, so we obviously have to consider anything that he's involved with. We have one public speaker from the parish council and one public speaker, just public. So parish council, if you'd like to come and speak.
Good evening, Chair. This application first came to the committee in December 2024. It was deferred due to a question of land ownership. In this submission, the applicant is relying on a loose definition of the government's new grey belt, claiming that this site falls into that category. This site is not grey belt, it is ancient woodland in the green belt. The soil bund that the applicant believes is proof that the site had been previously developed is where the applicant themselves dumped questionably illegally excess sand from and when they extended the course from 9 holes to 18 holes. Therefore, the claim of grey belt cannot be upheld. The applicant questions the designation of ancient woodland as they claim there are no trees over 100 years old. This is due to the applicant felling trees when extending the course. In the KCC Ecological Advice Service report, it states that the applicant has not provided sufficient information, and paragraph 186 of the NPPF states development on ancient woodland should be refused without wholly exceptional reasons. The site does not have any exceptional reasons. Natural England's standing advice is that not all trees have to be old. Ancient woodland is a continually regenerating area. The rest of the ecological report goes on to question any development on the site and highlights the devastation it would have on the ancient woodland and habitats in and around the site. The applicant states that this would assist in unmet housing need. Flat does not have a need for 3-4 bedroom type property on Windmill Hill. A single vehicle lane has already suffered from the amount of traffic using it. The site has a footpath which is accessed via the proposed access of the site. This is shown as the running outside the red line, but does not state how it will be treated inside the site. There is no mention of this in the application. Finally, the applicant states that this application should be granted as they want to generate funds for the clubhouse. Generating funds for a fee-paying private members-only business is not a planning consideration. It is of no interest to the committee that the applicant wishes to spend their profits on. It is not an exceptional circumstances that justifies decimating ancient woodland and precious habitat on the Greenbelt site. This applicant is not a public facility and needs protection as they pertain to be seen. Flat Parish asks you to reject this application. Thank you.
Our second speaker is Mr. Sayer.
Good evening. I'm Ian Sayer, the chair of Rootermeath Golf Club, the applicant for this proposal, which was submitted over 14 months ago. We are a not-for-profit members golf club, meaning all income is reinvested in the club and everything we do is geared to the best interests of our members. An established, valued community facility, we employ 15 to 20 local residents and offer health, wellbeing and social benefits to a diverse mix of over 600 local men, women and juniors. We are not asset rich and aim only for a small annual cash surplus to reinvest and keep pace with wealthier peers. Last year, we had to postpone path improvements because our oven broke down and we had to divert funds to replace it. Recurring feedback from current and exiting members is that our golf course is great, but the clubhouse lets us down. We cannot cut costs on the course, as that is the reason people drive through the entrance. Our clubhouse is an 18th century former oast building, leased for £60,000 a year from the Diocese of Rochester. It is dated and tired, and a large part of it has no proper foundations. Since your rejection of our proposal in December, we have commissioned a building conditions report which identified £188,000 of costs purely for remedial work. Our lease has 17 years to run, allows only upward reviews and is a full repairing lease, meaning we are responsible for all maintenance and costs. Our landlord has rebuffed our plea for help and we lack the financial resources to improve and modernise the clubhouse. Without clubhouse improvements, we risk decline and ultimate closure if we cannot attract and retain sufficient membership. The surplus land covered in the proposal is owned by us and is our only saleable asset. Approval would realise the funds needed. Regretfully, we do not feel the serious detrimental consequences of potential club closure on the local community have been given sufficient emphasis in the committee's report. Our proposal removes a large unsightly soil bund created by third-party construction waste dumped without the knowledge of the club some years ago. According to the Town and Country Planning Act, such reshaping of land and movement of earth commonly falls within the definition of engineering operations, and the land is therefore previously developed. Our firm understanding is that development would not result in the loss of trees forming part of an ancient woodland. The Magic database shows the development site in question borders, but is not on, replanted ancient woodland. The removal of the bund would in fact be beneficial to the adjacent ancient woodland over the existing position. Officers have not fairly considered this, and since it would not harm ancient woodland, it should be considered Greybelt land, an appropriate development. The report references the Valleywood and Rootham Golf Course wildlife site. TNBC's local plan describes the site as remnants of a larger area of dry and wet heathland and sessile oak woodland. We already have a well-established partnership with Natural England to enhance our heathland, so we are doing our bit, and the exact site of the development is neither heathland nor oak woodland. We've provided a detailed, very special circumstances case centering on protecting the future of our valued community facility, and only seek permission for a single dwelling on a small plot of poor quality Greybelt land, which does not contribute meaningfully to any Greenbelt purposes. I respectfully ask your support for our proposal and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay. Would anybody like to speak on this? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I wanted to thank the officers for such a concise and detailed report. I couldn't have done better myself. There's one point I did want to make, and it refers to what the applicant was saying just now. A bund is an engineered earthwork to mitigate sound, noise, vision, or even flooding. It is not a heap of dirt dumped in a wood. And I'm wondering whether the powers this council has, either under environmental health or fly tipping waste management, we can require the applicant to remove that waste from that woodland. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Borton.
We discussed this in December, so I'm not going to try and have that discussion again. I voted against refusing this in December, and I think I'll vote against refusing it now. But my question is actually, we're seeing, as far as I'm aware, we're having this discussion right now because the decision wasn't issued after, before the MPPF was published. Now, the meeting was on the 4th of December. The revised MPPF was published on the 12th of December, so about a week late. So maybe a question for James is roughly how long is it taking us to issue decisions after area planning committees? Obviously, this went with the officer recommendation in the end. The reason I sort of say that is I appreciate there's sometimes a delay, but when it's an executive decision, Vicky and her colleagues in Democratic Services hassle rightly me to get it out. So from a planning perspective, is this delay of a week usual, or are there any mitigating circumstances on this particular application?
Yeah, do you want to come back?
In terms of addressing that point, we'd normally have to wait for agreement of the minutes, which would then need to be circulated, and then we should be issuing the decision notice, because we should be doing that as soon as possible after. I haven't got the reasons for the extenuating circumstances why this case wasn't issued in that time, and I'd need to look into go back into that. But my expectation would be, unless it's obviously a Section 106 agreement, which obviously can take up to 3 months to negotiate that, depending, you had the detailed heads of terms under the London Gulf, which will take probably quite a significant period of time of going backwards and forwards. So Section 106 does take a lot of time, but on something like this, I would expect the decision to be issued normally within the week. But I need to look in, and I can come back to members as to the reasons for the delay on this application, because we should be issuing decisions quickly after the resolution is made by members, because there's no reason to hold that decision up. So I will come back to members on that basis and then establish why.
Okay, anybody else like to speak on this application? Okay, the proposal is to refuse permission. We take that to a vote. Can I have a seconder? Mr. Taylor would second that. And can we do that by roll call?
Councillor Banks,
Support the recommendation.
Horton,
Against.
So support the recommendation for refusal.
Correct.
Yeah. And you were against the recommendation.
I was against the recommendation for refusal in December, so I feel I should be consistent in being against the recommendation for refusal right now.
So if you are approve the recommendation or if you are like Councillor Borton against the recommendation, you're against. Proposal is to refuse, so therefore 4 is to refuse and against is to approve.
that's against. Again, Councillor Banks,
Support.
Sorry. For refusal. For refusal.
Horton,
Against.
Councillor Boxall,
For.
Coffin,
For.
Dean,
For.
Hudson,
Against.
Clark, Rudd,
Against.
Against.
Patton,
For.
Councillor Taylor,
Or
Palmer,
For.
7, 4, 5 against.
That application was refused again. Okay. That is the last of our applications for this evening. The appeals that we've had come through, you have a list of in your notes. I have no urgent items, and no other in consideration are part 2 items. So therefore, I would like to close this meeting at 12 minutes past 10. Thank you.